"You can stay for tonight," the poor woman said to the stranger. But she had no idea this man wasn't just lost in the storm. He was a billionaire, hiding from a world that betrayed him. She only wanted to give him a warm meal and a roof over his head. But soon, her small act of kindness sets off a chain of events no one in her town could have imagined. Whispers spread, neighbors grow suspicious. And when his true identity is exposed, the woman who opened her door finds herself accused of a scheme she never planned. As secrets unravel and hearts are put to the test, was this chance encounter a blessing that could heal two broken lives, or the scandal that destroys them both? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you. Make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The autumn wind howled through the empty streets, driving sheets of icy rain against Claire's worn jacket as she hurried home from her double shift at the diner. Her shoes splashed through puddles, soaking her feet, but she couldn't slow down. Her daughter would be waiting, probably worried sick by now. The streetlights cast weak halos through the stormy darkness, barely lighting her familiar path home. As she approached her small house, something made her pause. There, slumped against her wooden front gate, was a dark shape. Her heart jumped into her throat. For a moment, fear kept her frozen in place, her fingers clutching her bag tighter. But then a flash of lightning revealed a man's face, pale and drawn, his body shaking violently in the cold. "Oh my goodness," Claire whispered. Compassion pushed aside her fear, and she rushed forward. Sir, can you hear me?" The man's eyes fluttered open, glazed with exhaustion and cold. His clothes were completely soaked through, his lips tinged slightly blue. Without hesitation, Claire wrapped her arm around his shoulders, helping him to his feet. He was barely able to stand, leaning heavily against her as she guided him toward her front door. "Mom," her daughter called out as they entered, her young face appearing in the hallway. Her eyes widened at the sight of the stranger. "Who's that?" "Sweetie, grab our spare blanket from the closet, quickly," Claire instructed, helping the man to their worn but comfortable couch. Her daughter darted away, returning moments later with their only extra blanket, a faded patchwork quilt Claire's mother had made years ago. Claire wrapped the blanket around the shivering man's shoulders while her daughter watched from the doorway, curiosity and concern mixing on her face. The stranger's hands trembled as he clutched the blanket closer, water dripping from his hair onto the couch cushions. Thank you," he managed to whisper through chattering teeth, his voice rough but sincere. His eyes met Claire's, filled with gratitude and something else, perhaps shame at needing help, or relief at finding kindness on such a bitter night. Claire looked at him for a long moment, then glanced at her daughter, who gave her an encouraging nod. She took a deep breath and said softly, "You can stay for tonight." The words surprised her even as she spoke them. It wasn't like her to invite strangers into their home. But something about this man's desperate situation touched her heart, reminding her of times when she'd needed help herself. The storm continued to rage outside their windows, but inside, the small house felt warmer somehow, despite the wet clothes and worried faces. Claire's daughter brought an extra cup of hot tea, setting it carefully beside the stranger, while Claire found some old towels for him to dry off with. As they prepared for bed, the sound of the rain seemed less threatening, more like a lullaby protecting their unexpected act of kindness. The pale morning light crept through Claire's kitchen window as she stirred the pot of oatmeal, adding more water to make it stretch. Her wooden spoon scraped the bottom of the pot, the sound matching the rhythm of her worried thoughts. The oatmeal looked thin and plain, nothing like the hearty breakfast she wished she could offer her guest. The floorboards creaked behind her, and she turned to see their visitor entering the kitchen. The difference from last night was striking. His clothes, though still worn from the storm, were now dry and neat. His face, cleaned up and rested, held a quiet dignity she hadn't noticed before. "Good morning," he said, his voice warm and clear. "I'm Nolan Bradley. I can't thank you enough for your kindness last night." Claire nodded, trying to hide her embarrassment as she set the humble bowls of oatmeal on the table. "It's nothing fancy, I'm afraid." "It's perfect," Nolan replied, sitting down with impeccable posture that seemed out of place in her simple kitchen. The patter of small feet announced Claire's daughter, who bounded into the kitchen with the energy only children possess in the early morning. Her eyes lit up at the sight of their guest, and she slid into her chair, barely able to contain her curiosity. "Did you sleep okay on our couch?" she asked, spooning up her oatmeal. Mom says it's lumpy, but I think it's nice. Nolan's face softened into a genuine smile. The couch was very comfortable. Thank you, much better than. He paused, leaving the thought unfinished. Where are you from? Claire's daughter continued, unaware of his hesitation. Your voice sounds different, like my teacher Mrs. Anderson, who came from the big city. Claire noticed how Nolan held his spoon, delicately, with practiced grace. His manners were refined, each movement precise and controlled. He answered the girl's questions carefully, speaking with educated words, but revealing little about himself. Later that morning, while Claire sat by the fireplace mending a pile of clothes from her neighbors, extra work she'd taken on to make ends meet, she heard Nolan's voice drift in. Through the window, he'd stepped outside to make a phone call, probably seeking privacy. Yes, I understand the implications, he was saying, his tone completely transformed. Gone was the gentle gratitude from breakfast, replaced by something that commanded attention. The board meeting can proceed without me. I've arranged for everything to be handled remotely. Claire's fingers stilled on her needlework. This wasn't the voice of someone down on his luck. The authority in his words spoke of corner offices and important decisions, not of someone who would collapse at a stranger's gate during a storm. She glanced down at her worn sewing basket, then back toward the window, where Nolan's voice continued, firm and assured, discussing things far removed from her simple life. The mystery of their guest had just grown considerably deeper, and Claire wasn't sure what to make of it. The evening shadows lengthened across Claire's small living room as she finished washing the dinner dishes. Her daughter was curled up on the threadbare couch with a book, while Nolan stood by the window, his silhouette cut against the dying light. Something in his posture suggested he was wrestling with a decision. Claire, he said finally, turning to face her, I need to tell you the truth about who I am. She dried her hands on a dish towel, watching him carefully. The refined way he carried himself suddenly made more sense as he continued. I'm not who you might think I am. I'm actually. He paused, running a hand through his silver-streaked hair. I'm a billionaire philanthropist. I've been traveling anonymously, trying to understand how real people live, away from the artificial world I usually inhabit. Claire's hands gripped the towel tighter. Her mind raced with conflicting thoughts. Was this some elaborate scam? Why would a billionaire be walking in a storm? Yet something in his eyes held the same honest warmth she'd seen when he'd first thanked her for helping him. I know, this must sound incredible, Nolan continued, his voice gentle, but I need you to know, if you hadn't taken me in last night, I might not have survived that storm. Your kindness. His voice caught slightly. It meant everything. Claire sank into a kitchen chair, trying to process his words. I don't understand. Why tell me this now? Because I've seen the past. Due notice is on your counter, he said quietly. I would like to help, discreetly, of course. Let me cover your unpaid bills. Pride flared in Claire's chest. We get by just fine, she said stiffly, though the weight of the overdue electricity bill felt heavier than ever. Mom? Her daughter's small voice came from the couch. She'd put down her book and was watching them with those wise eyes that sometimes seemed too knowing for her age. Maybe this is God's answer. Remember what Pastor Mike said about help coming in unexpected ways? Claire's throat tightened. She'd been praying for a way to keep the lights on, to avoid another notice. But accepting help from a stranger, even one who claimed to be a billionaire, felt like admitting defeat. Nolan pulled out his phone. Just the electricity bill, he said softly. Nothing more. Sometimes allowing others to help is its own kind of strength. Claire looked at her daughter's hopeful face, then back at Nolan's sincere expression. After a long moment, she nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. Just the electricity bill. The relief in her daughter's smile made her heart ache with both gratitude and humility. Sometimes, she realized, pride had to bow to Providence, especially when it came wearing such an unexpected face. The morning sun cast long shadows across Claire's small kitchen as she made a grocery list, carefully counting the dollars in her worn leather wallet. Nolan appeared in the doorway, already dressed for the day in his now-dried designer clothes that somehow looked out of place in her humble home. I insist on contributing to the groceries, he said, his voice gentle but firm. It's the least I can do after your hospitality. Claire started to protest, but her daughter piped up from the table where she was finishing her cereal. Mom, remember what you always say about not being too proud to accept help. The drive into town was quiet, with Claire directing Nolan to the local market. The bell above the door chimed as they entered, and heads turned to study the unfamiliar face. Claire noticed Mrs. Peterson, the nosiest neighbor on their street, watching them from behind the produce display. "Who's that with Claire?" Mrs. Peterson whispered loudly to another shopper, not bothering to lower her voice. "Looks mighty fancy for these parts. Better watch out, you never know about strangers these days." Claire's cheeks burned, but Nolan seemed unfazed. He pushed the cart while she selected items, adding extra groceries when she wasn't looking. At the meat counter, he insisted on choosing a good cut of beef for stew, gently overriding her selection of the cheapest option. "Trust me," he said with a warm smile. "I may not know much about small-town life, but I do know good food." The whispers followed them through the store. "Did you see his watch?" one woman murmured. "What's a man like that doing with Claire?" By the time they reached the checkout, Claire could feel the weight of suspicious stares. Back at home, Nolan surprised her by heading straight for the woodpile. "I noticed you're running low on firewood," he said, rolling up his sleeves. Claire couldn't help but notice his hands, soft and unmarked by manual labor. "Have you ever actually chopped wood before?" she asked, trying to hide her amusement. "How hard can it be?" he replied with a grin, picking up the axe somewhat awkwardly. His first few swings were clumsy, the axe barely making a dent in the log. Claire's daughter sat on the porch steps, giggling as she watched. But Nolan was a quick learner, and soon he found his rhythm, though his technique was far from perfect. As evening approached, Claire stirred the beef stew simmering on the stove while Nolan helped her daughter set the table. The rich aroma filled the small house, mixing with the scent of fresh-baked cornbread. When they sat down to eat, Claire was struck by how natural it felt, the three of them sharing this simple meal together. Her daughter regaled them with stories from school, and Nolan listened intently, asking questions and sharing gentle jokes. The sound of their laughter echoed through the house, bright and genuine. Claire couldn't remember the last time these walls had held such joy. Even the cramped kitchen seemed warmer somehow, filled with conversation and the kind of comfortable ease she thought she'd forgotten how to feel. After dinner, Claire and Nolan sat in the living room while her daughter worked on a puzzle nearby. The fire crackled softly, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Claire noticed how Nolan's eyes seemed distant as he gazed into the flames. "You mentioned earlier that you were traveling alone," Claire said carefully. "Don't you have family wondering where you are?" Nolan's shoulders tensed slightly. "My family and we're not close anymore. Haven't been for years." He shifted in his chair, his voice growing quieter. "When you have money, it's hard to know who truly cares about you. Everyone wants something: business deals, investments, donations to their causes. Even my own siblings seem to see me more as a bank than a brother." Claire watched his face in the firelight, seeing the pain he tried to hide. "That must be incredibly lonely," she said softly. "It made me careful. Maybe too careful." He gave a hollow laugh. "I started testing people, appearing less wealthy to see how they'd treat me. Most failed that test spectacularly." Claire nodded, memories of her own struggles surfacing. "After Tom, my husband, died, I learned a lot about true friendship." She twisted the simple gold band she still wore. "When I couldn't afford to go out to restaurants anymore or chip in for expensive birthday gifts, my social circle got smaller and smaller. People stopped calling, stopped inviting us over." "Their loss," Nolan said firmly, glancing at Claire's daughter, who was now completely absorbed in her mathematics homework. "Need any help with that?" he called over to her. Her face brightened as she nodded eagerly. Nolan moved to the floor beside her, patiently explaining the problems. Claire watched them, warmth filling her heart at how naturally they interacted. A sharp knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. Mrs. Peterson, her next-door neighbor, stood on the porch, clutching her cardigan tight against the evening chill. "Claire, dear, could I have a word?" Her eyes darted past Claire's shoulder, trying to peek inside. Stepping onto the porch and closing the door behind her, Claire faced her neighbor's concerned expression. "I couldn't help but notice your guest," Mrs. Peterson said, lowering her voice. "Nobody seems to know anything about him. Don't you think that's strange? A man of obvious means, staying in your home, being so secretive about his background." She touched Claire's arm. "I'm just worried about you and your little girl, dear. These days, you can't be too careful with strangers." The words stung, though Claire knew they came from a place of genuine concern, mixed with more than a little curiosity and judgment. "Thank you for your concern," she said stiffly, "but I can handle my own affairs." Back inside, Claire leaned against the door, her heart heavy. She watched Nolan and her daughter laughing over her homework, yet Mrs. Peterson's words echoed in her mind. In this small town where everyone knew everyone else's business, how long before more neighbors started asking questions? How long before the whispers and suspicious glances became too much to bear? The morning sun had barely crept over the horizon when Claire was startled awake by rhythmic thumping from outside. Wrapping her worn robe tightly around herself, she peered through the frost-kissed window to find Nolan on his knees at her front porch, tools scattered around him as he worked on the broken bottom step. She quietly opened the door, careful not to wake her daughter. "You didn't have to do that," she said softly. Nolan looked up, a light sheen of sweat on his forehead despite the chilly morning air. "This step's been wobbling since I got here. Thought I'd make myself useful." He gave the newly secured board a pat. "Though I'll admit, I'm more used to signing checks than swinging hammers." "Let me at least get you some coffee," Claire offered, touched by his thoughtfulness. Minutes later, she returned with 2 steaming mugs, watching as he finished up the repair. Later that morning, they walked together to the church where Claire volunteered in the soup kitchen every Wednesday. The old building's paint was peeling, and several shingles hung precariously from the roof. Inside, the kitchen buzzed with activity as volunteers prepared large pots of vegetable soup. "We serve about 50 people each week," Claire explained, handing Nolan an apron. "More when the weather turns cold." Nolan tied the apron with careful precision, rolling up his expensive shirt sleeves. For the next few hours, they worked side by side, ladling soup into bowls for a steady stream of people. Elderly couples stretching their social security checks, single mothers with young children, men down on their luck. Claire noticed how Nolan spoke to each person with genuine interest and respect, never showing a hint of his wealthy background. During a quiet moment, the pastor approached, worry lines creasing his forehead as he discussed the church's leaking roof with another volunteer. Nolan listened intently while pretending to organize supplies. When no one was watching, he slipped a thick envelope into the church's donation box. Claire saw the gesture, but said nothing, understanding his desire for anonymity. She'd noticed how his eyes had grown troubled throughout the morning, taking in the worn clothes and tired faces of those they served. As dusk approached, they walked home together, their steps falling into an easy rhythm. The autumn air had grown crisp, and leaves crunched beneath their feet. Neither spoke much, but the silence felt comfortable, filled with shared understanding from their day of service. Claire sensed something shifting between them, a deepening connection built on more than just gratitude or obligation. "Thank you," Nolan said finally, breaking the quiet, "for letting me help today, for letting me see what real community looks like." Claire glanced at him, noting how the setting sun softened his features. "Sometimes the smallest things make the biggest difference," she replied, thinking of both his generous donation and the simple act of fixing her porch step. As autumn days grew shorter, Nolan settled into the gentle rhythm of Claire's household like a leaf finding its place in a stream. One afternoon, Claire sat at her sewing table, pins between her lips, as she worked on mending a neighbor's dress. Nolan watched with fascination. "Could you teach me?" he asked, pulling up a chair beside her. Claire couldn't help but smile. "You want to learn to sew? Why not? I've run billion-dollar companies, but I can't even fix a loose button." She handed him a scrap of fabric and threaded a needle for him. His large hands, more suited to signing contracts than detailed needlework, fumbled with the delicate tools. The thread kept slipping out of the needle's eye, and when he finally managed to start, he pricked his finger almost immediately. "Ouch." He stuck his finger in his mouth, then started laughing. "I guess I won't be taking over your business anytime soon." Claire found herself joining in his laughter, the sound filling her small sewing room with unexpected warmth. In the evenings, after her daughter went to bed, Claire and Nolan would sit by the fireplace, sharing stories in the gentle glow. One night, Claire found herself talking about her late husband, memories she'd kept locked away for so long. "Tom used to sing in the shower," she said softly, staring into the flames. Terrible voice, but so happy. The house felt so quiet after. Her voice trailed off, but Nolan's patient silence gave her the courage to continue. Sometimes the loneliness feels like a physical thing, you know, like a weight pressing down. Nolan nodded, understanding in his eyes. My childhood home was like that, full of expensive things but empty of warmth. My parents were always too busy with social obligations to actually parent. He picked at a loose thread on his sleeve. I used to sneak down to our housekeeper's quarters just to feel what a real family was like. Her kids would be doing homework at the kitchen table while she cooked dinner. It smelled like love in there. The next day, they took her daughter to the local marketplace. As they walked among the stalls of fresh vegetables and homemade crafts, the little girl naturally slipped her small hand into Nolan's. He looked startled for a moment, then his fingers gently closed around hers. Claire watched them walking together, her daughter chattering about her school project while Nolan listened intently. The sight made her heart swell and ache at the same time. Her daughter hadn't had a father figure in so long, and now she was forming an attachment that could only lead to more pain when Nolan inevitably returned to his real life. But for now, watching them examine a display of autumn squash together, Claire allowed herself to enjoy this moment of simple happiness, even as she tried to guard her heart against the future. Word traveled fast in small towns, spreading like wildfire through church meetings and grocery store aisles. Claire noticed the change gradually at first, sideways glances, conversations that stopped when she walked by, and neighbors who suddenly found reasons to cross the street. Mrs. Peterson, the nosy neighbor from 2 houses down, cornered Claire outside the post office one morning. "Dear, we're all very concerned," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "A single woman, housing a strange man. What kind of example does that set for your daughter?" Claire's cheeks burned, but she kept her head high. "Nolan is a guest who needed help. Nothing more." "Oh, is that what they're calling it these days, Mrs.?" Peterson's laugh was sharp as broken glass. "And I suppose his mysterious phone calls and fancy manners are perfectly innocent too." The whispers grew louder, more pointed. At the diner where Claire worked, customers muttered about that con man staying with the widow. Some suggested he was after her late husband's non-existent fortune. Others claimed he was running from the law. One afternoon, Claire found an anonymous note pushed under her door. "Decent women don't take in strange men." The paper crumpled in her trembling hands. That evening, after her daughter went upstairs to do homework, Nolan found Claire sitting alone in the kitchen, her eyes red-rimmed. He pulled up a chair beside her. "I heard what they're saying in town," he said quietly. "I should go, Claire. You don't deserve this kind of scrutiny." Claire looked up at him, her voice firm despite her tears. "No, you've done nothing wrong. Look at all the good you've brought to this town. The church roof, the help you've given families in need. If people want to gossip, let them. But your reputation—" "My reputation isn't worth more than doing what's right," she interrupted. "My daughter needs to see that standing up for what you believe in matters more than what others think." Nolan sat quietly for a moment, clearly moved by her words. Then he reached for a package he'd brought in earlier. "I got something for you today," he said, pushing it across the table. Claire unwrapped the brown paper to find a winter coat, not new, but well made and carefully chosen. The deep blue wool was soft under her fingers. "I noticed you shivering yesterday when you walked home from work," he explained. "Your old coat has more patches than original fabric." Claire ran her hand over the coat, emotion catching in her throat. No one had thought about her needs in so long. She'd been too busy taking care of everyone else. The simple act of kindness broke through her careful defenses. "Thank you," she whispered, the words carrying the weight of all she couldn't say. Outside, the autumn wind rattled the windows, but inside Claire's kitchen, warmth bloomed like a flower opening to the Sunday. Autumn painted the town in brilliant shades of red and gold as preparations for the annual harvest festival began. Despite the lean times, neighbors contributed what they could: homemade pies cooling on windowsills, hand-sewn decorations, and strings of lights rescued from attics. "You should come with us," Nolan said one morning, watching Claire hang laundry in the crisp air. "The festival sounds wonderful." Claire hesitated, remembering last year's festival, when pitying looks followed her everywhere. "I don't know." Her daughter bounded out of the house, eyes sparkling. "Please, Mom. Miss Johnson says there'll be apple bobbing and dancing." "I'd be honored to escort you both," Nolan added softly, his gentle smile reaching his eyes. Claire found herself nodding. her daughter's excitement infectious. "All right, we'll go." The town square transformed for the evening, twinkling lights strung between trees and the aroma of cinnamon and apple cider filling the air. Paper lanterns swayed in the breeze, casting warm circles of light across familiar faces. To everyone's surprise, Nolan threw himself into the festivities with childlike enthusiasm. He joined the sack race, stumbling and laughing as children zoomed past him. His suit jacket abandoned, sleeves rolled up, he bobbed for apples alongside the town's youngest residents, emerging with a dripping face and a triumphant grin. "Mr. Nolan," Claire's daughter called out, "come dance with us." Without hesitation, Nolan joined the circle of children, learning the simple steps to their folk dance. His genuine joy was contagious, and soon even the most skeptical onlookers found themselves tapping their feet. Claire watched from the sidelines, something warm unfurling in her chest. This was a different Nolan than the polished businessman who made important phone calls. Here was a man who didn't care about dignity or appearance, who found joy in simple pleasures. As the evening deepened, the band struck up a slower tune. Nolan approached Claire, extending his hand. "May I have this dance?" Under the golden glow of lantern light, they swayed together. The familiar whispers and stares faded away until it felt like they were alone in their own peaceful bubble. "Thank you," Claire murmured, "for making this evening special. Thank you for letting me be part of it," Nolan replied, his voice soft but sincere. Looking up into his kind eyes, Claire felt the walls around her heart beginning to crack. For the first time since losing her husband, she allowed herself to imagine a different future, one filled with laughter, shared meals, and perhaps even love again. Around them, the townspeople's hard expressions had softened. They saw how Nolan helped old Mrs. Jenkins to her seat, the way he bought treats for children whose parents couldn't afford them, how naturally he fit into their community. The suspicious whispers gradually gave way to approving nods and warm smiles. Her daughter twirled nearby, her face glowing with happiness, and Claire realized that sometimes the best gifts came in unexpected packages, like a stranger appearing on a stormy night, bringing light back into their lives. The peaceful aftermath of the Harvest Festival lasted only 3 days before everything came crashing down. A sharp knock at Claire's door that morning brought more than just an unexpected visitor. It brought chaos. A well-dressed man with a press badge thrust a newspaper into Claire's hands. "Care to comment on harboring billionaire Nolan Bradley?" The tabloid journalist's smile didn't reach his eyes. The reclusive philanthropist living in small-town squalor. It's quite the story. Claire's hands trembled as she stared at the front-page photo of Nolan at a corporate event. Looking polished in an expensive suit, the headline screamed, "Billionaire Bradley's secret small-town hideaway." Within hours, the news spread through town like wildfire. Claire couldn't walk to work without feeling the weight of accusing stares. The whispers grew louder, more venomous. "She must have known all along," Mrs. Peterson said loudly at the grocery store. "Planned the whole thing, I bet. Playing poor to trap a rich man." Another voice chimed in, using her daughter to tug at his heartstrings. The cruel words cut deep, but what hurt more was how quickly their neighbors turned on them. The same people who had danced and laughed with them at the festival now crossed the street to avoid them. Nolan tried to explain to anyone who would listen, but the damage was done. The tabloid journalists lurked around town, spinning tales of deception and scandal, turning their simple story of kindness into something ugly and calculated. That evening, after Claire's daughter went to bed, Nolan began packing his few belongings. His shoulders slumped with the weight of guilt as he wrote a note at the kitchen table. "Dear Claire, I never meant to bring such pain into your life. You opened your home to a stranger in need, and I've repaid your kindness with scandal. The gossip will die down once I'm gone. Please forgive me for disrupting your peace. With deepest regret, Nolan." The scratch of his pen stopped abruptly when he heard small footsteps behind him. Claire's daughter stood in her pajamas, eyes wide with understanding beyond her years. "You're leaving us?" Her voice quivered. But you can't." Nolan set down his pen, his heart breaking at the tears welling in her eyes. "Sweet girl, I've caused enough trouble for you and your mother." "No." She rushed forward, grabbing his arm. "The mean people are wrong. You make Mom smile again. You help me with homework and tell the best stories." Her grip tightened. "Please don't go. Please don't leave us like Daddy did." Nolan froze, the child's raw honesty striking him to his core. Her small hands clutched his sleeve, as if she could physically anchor him to their lives, to the home they'd begun to build together. The farewell note sat unfinished on the table, his pen abandoned mid-sentence, as Claire's daughter's plea hung in the air between them. The church bells rang out across the quiet Sunday morning, their familiar sound now carrying a weight of dread. Claire stood at her front door, smoothing her daughter's dress with trembling hands. "Maybe we shouldn't go," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. "We have to, Mom," her daughter said firmly, taking her hand. "It's the right thing to do." The walk to church felt longer than usual. Every step on the gravel path echoed with the weight of what was to come. As they approached the white wooden building, Claire spotted Nolan hovering uncertainly near the side entrance, dressed in the same simple clothes he'd worn all week. Inside, the usual warm fellowship had turned cold. Conversation stopped mid-sentence as Claire walked down the aisle. Whispers followed like autumn leaves rustling in the wind. She caught fragments of harsh words. "Taking advantage. Deceived us all. Should be ashamed." Claire's daughter squeezed her hand tighter as they settled into their usual pew. The familiar comfort of the wooden bench felt different today, harder somehow. She noticed Nolan trying to slip unnoticed through the back door, his shoulders hunched against the weight of judgment. The pastor stood at the pulpit, his kind eyes scanning the congregation. He opened his Bible, but before he could speak, Claire rose to her feet. Her legs shook, but her voice rang clear through the hushed sanctuary. "Please," she said, "I need to say something." The pastor nodded, giving her the space to speak. Claire turned to face her neighbors, people she'd known all her life. Their faces, some curious, others hard with judgment, stared back at her. "When I found Nolan at my gate that stormy night, he was just a stranger who needed help. I didn't know he was wealthy. I didn't know his last name." Her voice grew stronger with each word. "But I knew what it meant to be alone, to need kindness. And isn't that what we're taught to do? To help those in need?" She paused, drawing a deep breath. "Yes, he's rich in money, but I've come to know him as someone poor in something far more important: hope. He came to our town looking for real connection, real humanity, and now we're proving his worst fears right." Tears filled her eyes, but she blinked them back. "I will not abandon him. Not because he's Nolan Bradley the billionaire, but because he's Nolan, the man who fixes my porch steps, helps my daughter with her homework, and brings laughter back into our home." Near the back door, Nolan stood frozen, his hand still on the handle. His eyes glistened with emotion as he watched Claire defend him with such raw honesty. The silence in the church felt different now. Heads bowed in reflection, shoulders softened. The pastor's gentle smile showed approval as Claire sat back down, her daughter's small hand finding hers again. Nolan remained at the back, humbled by Claire's courage, watching as the whispers slowly died away and understanding began to dawn on familiar faces. The morning after church, Claire pushed her cart through the marketplace, trying to hold her head high. The usual friendly chatter died as she passed. Mrs. Peterson, who had always greeted her warmly, now turned away, pulling her shopping basket closer as if Claire might steal it. "I heard he's worth billions," someone whispered loudly. She certainly knew what she was doing, taking him in. Claire's hands trembled as she picked through the apples, pretending not to hear. The fruit seller, normally chatty, merely pointed to the price sign without meeting her eyes. Nolan appeared beside her, his face tight with concern. He'd been watching from across the street, and the coldness toward Claire cut him deeply. "Let me help with that," he said softly, reaching for her heavy basket. As they walked to a quieter corner of the market, Nolan spoke in hushed tones. "Claire, I can't bear seeing you treated this way. Let me help you start fresh somewhere else, maybe in Cedar Rapids or Des Moines. Somewhere bigger, where people won't judge. I could set you up with a proper shop for your seamstress work." Claire stopped walking and turned to face him. "Running away isn't the answer, Nolan. These people, they're still my neighbors. Some may be unkind now, but this is my home, my daughter's home." Back at the house that evening, Claire stirred a pot of vegetable soup while her daughter set the table for three, something that had become natural over the past weeks. The kitchen was warm and fragrant, a stark contrast to the cold shoulders they'd faced in town. As they settled around the table, Claire's daughter reached for the bread basket. "Can you pass the salt, Nolan?" she asked casually. Then, With the simple honesty of a child, she added, "You know, you're part of our family now." The words hung in the air like a precious gift. Nolan's spoon stopped halfway to his mouth, and Claire saw his eyes grow bright with tears. He set the spoon down carefully, trying to master his emotion. He started, then had to clear his throat. "I haven't had a real family in a very long time." Claire watched as her daughter got up from her chair and wrapped her arms around Nolan's shoulders in a natural hug. In that moment, she saw what her daughter had already understood. Sometimes family isn't about where you come from, but where you belong. The old mill at the edge of town had stood silent for years, its weathered walls a reminder of better days. Now, thanks to an anonymous investment, its doors were open again, offering work to dozens of townspeople who'd been struggling to make ends meet. Nolan showed up early one morning, wearing work boots and plain canvas pants. The foreman raised an eyebrow as he approached. "Can I help you, Mr. Bradley?" "I'd like to work," Nolan said simply. "Regular shifts, just like everyone else." Laughter rippled through the group of men nearby. One called out, "Better protect those soft hands of yours." Nolan looked down at his palms, smooth from years behind a desk, and smiled. "They won't stay soft for long. Those first days were hard." Blisters formed and broke on his hands as he learned to operate the machinery. His muscles ached from lifting heavy loads. But each morning, he returned, quiet and determined. He asked questions, listened carefully, and never complained. Claire would pack him lunches in a brown paper bag, just like the other workers' wives did for their husbands. When he came home in the evenings, clothes dusty and face tired, she'd have hot water ready for washing up. "You don't have to prove anything," she told him one night as she helped bandage his raw palms. "I'm not trying to prove something," he replied softly. "I'm trying to learn something." Gradually, the mockery at the mill faded. The men began to notice how Nolan never avoided the harder tasks, how he'd stay late to help finish a job, how he knew everyone's names and asked about their families. At dinner, Claire's daughter would eagerly ask about his day at the mill, fascinated by his stories about the machines and the people. Their modest kitchen table became a place of warm conversation and shared prayers, filled with the kind of genuine connection Nolan had missed his whole life. One evening, after a particularly long shift, the foreman stopped Nolan. "You know, Bradley, when you first showed up, we thought you were just playing at being one of us, but you've proved us wrong. You're a good worker and a good man." The words meant more to Nolan than any business deal he'd ever closed. He was finally being accepted not for his wealth, but for who he truly was. The first snow of December blanketed the small town in white, transforming Claire's modest home into something from a Christmas card. Inside, Nolan stood at her kitchen window, watching snowflakes dance in the fading light. His phone buzzed with messages from his corporate office. Year-end reports needed reviewing. Board meetings awaited his attendance. But here, in this warm kitchen with its faded curtains and worn linoleum floor, those demands felt distant. "Need help with those potatoes?" Claire asked, breaking into his thoughts. She was preparing for the Christmas Eve gathering he'd organized, her cheeks flushed from the heat of cooking. "I've learned from the best," he smiled, rolling up his sleeves to help. They worked side by side, preparing dishes that would feed the whole community. The dining room table groaned under platters of roasted turkey, fresh bread, and steaming vegetables, simple food made with care. As evening fell, neighbors began arriving, stamping snow from their boots on the porch. The same people who had once whispered suspicions now carried dishes of their own to share. Claire's daughter flitted between guests, her excitement infectious. When everyone had gathered, Nolan cleared his throat. The room fell silent. "A few months ago, I collapsed at Claire's gate during a storm," he began, his voice steady but full of emotion. "I was searching for something then, something all my wealth couldn't buy. I found it here, in your kindness, and especially in Claire's courage." He looked around the room, meeting familiar faces. "This community taught me what real riches look like. They look like neighbors helping neighbors, like trust freely given, like love that asks nothing in return." Someone started a prayer, and hands reached for hands across the room. The circle they formed bridged old divisions, joining hearts that had once been separated by suspicion and misunderstanding. In that moment, as candlelight flickered across faces both wealthy and modest, The true spirit of Christmas filled the room. After the last guests had departed, silence settled over Claire's home like the snow outside. Through the window, fat flakes drifted down, adding to the thick white blanket that covered the yard. The Christmas tree lights twinkled softly, casting warm shadows across the living room walls. Nolan added another log to the fireplace, while Claire's daughter curled up on the couch, clutching her new storybook. The crackling flames filled the room with golden light and comforting warmth. Moving to sit beside Claire, Nolan gently took her hand in his. His fingers, now roughened from work at the mill, intertwined with hers. "Claire," he said softly, his voice full of emotion, "I want to stay, not as someone who can help with bills or fix things around the house. I want to stay as your partner in life." Tears welled in Claire's eyes, but her smile was radiant. "I never wanted your money, Nolan," she whispered. "From that very first night, all I wanted was you, just you." Their moment was interrupted by a sleepy yawn from the couch. "Time for bed, little one," Nolan said, scooping up Claire's daughter. She snuggled against his shoulder as he carried her upstairs to her room. After tucking her in and kissing her forehead, he returned to find Claire waiting by the fire. Their eyes met across the room, filled with hope and promise. In that quiet moment, they both knew the lonely billionaire and the struggling widow had found something far more precious than wealth. They had built a family, transforming from strangers into something beautiful through simple acts of kindness and trust. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow, I'll bring you another story crafted with heart.